So I'll be talking about composably secure device-independent encryption with certified deletion, which is joint work with Ernest Tan from ETH Zurich. Okay, so first let me define what this task of encryption with certified deletion is. Suppose you have some kind of cryptographic setting where you have two parties, Alice and Bob, and Alice at time t1 sends some encrypted message M to Bob encrypted with the key K. And suppose at time t2, the key K is supposed to be revealed to Bob, and then he can decrypt the message, decrypt the ciphertext and recover the message M. Okay, now it might happen that sometime before this time t2, Alice has some reason to become suspicious of Bob, and Alice does not want him to learn the message anymore. Now Alice might want to ask Bob to delete his ciphertext, so that even when Bob receives the key later, he would not be able to decrypt the message. Now, ideally, what we want is that Bob should be able to give some kind of deletion certificate to Alice, which Alice might accept or reject. And we want that if Alice accepts the certificate, then even if Bob learns the key later, then Bob cannot decrypt the ciphertext. And so this is the task of encryption with certified deletion. That was introduced by Broadbent and Islam, and they gave a security definition for it as well. So one thing I'll note is that if Alice does not accept Bob's ciphertext, Bob's deletion certificate, then Bob can do whatever he likes. But we do not want that. Alice should simultaneously accept the deletion certificate, and Bob should be able to decrypt the message. Okay, the protocol given by Broadbent and Islam for the encryption with certified deletion task was in the standard or device dependent model. And what we do is that we modify the protocol. Well, we give an entirely new protocol which has device independent security. That is, Alice and Bob do not need to trust the states, and Alice rather does not need to trust the states and measurements that her quantum devices are performing. We also do a special modification which lets us provide security against a third-party eavesdropper. So even when Bob does get to learn the message, we ensure that a third-party eavesdropper cannot learn the message. And we also provide a composable security definition of the task and prove that our protocol achieves composable security. Okay, so first let me give some background on what device independence is. So an example of a standard quantum cryptography or device dependent setting would be the protocol given by Broadbent and Islam. So they had two kinds of protocols. One was the prepare and measure type of protocol where Alice knows the states that she prepares. Otherwise, you can have an entanglement based protocol, which they also give, where Alice instead knows the measurements she performs, but the state can be untrusted. But either way, the device dependent setting requires that Alice has some knowledge about the quantum stuff that she's doing. Unfortunately, in real quantum devices, I mean, Alice might get something from a supplier that she does not trust, or quantum devices in general are poorly characterized. So we want to weaken these assumptions that Alice perfectly knows what the devices are doing. So this gives us the framework of device independence. So let me give you an example of what the device independent setting looks like. Suppose we have two parties, Alice and Bob, who share some state. We don't know what the state is. And they have some devices which will basically model as black boxes. So the devices are also doing something, we don't know. But the devices will typically be compatible with some kind of non-local game. And so Alice and Bob will be able to input some inputs X and Y into their devices and get some outputs A and B. An example of this would be devices compatible with, say, the Magic Square non-local game. Here, Alice and Bob's inputs are going to be trits, and Alice and Bob's outputs are going to be 3-bit strings that respectively have even and odd parity. And they're considered to win the non-local game if this condition AY equal to BX is satisfied. That is, Alice's Yth bit should equal Bob's Xth bit. Now, some non-local games such as Magic Square have this property called self-testing or rigidity, which means that if the devices win the magic square game with probability 1 minus delta, where 1 minus delta has to be greater than the classical winning probability of the game, which is 8 by 9. Otherwise, you can't do anything. The quantum winning probability of the game in the perfect case is 1. So if the devices do win the magic square game with probability 1 minus delta, then even if we didn't know anything about the devices at first, we can say that up to isometries, their delta approximately close to the ideal state and measurements for the magic square game, which are Pauli measurements on Alice and Bob sides and 2 pairs of maximally entangled states as the shared state between them. So device independent security proofs thus have much fewer assumptions than the conventional device dependent settings. The only assumptions are that the devices Alice and Bob have obey quantum mechanics, and also that the devices don't leak any information to each other. Although this second assumption can be removed for QKD and also this ECD protocol for the ECD task that we give. This I show in a new paper with Rahul, which is up on arXiv. Anyway, and DI security proofs generally involve several boxes for tasks like QKD and also ECD that we'll consider. So here you can consider 2 kinds of settings. In the sequential setting, honest parties enter inputs and get outputs from the boxes 1 by 1. And in the parallel setting, the honest parties can enter inputs and get outputs from the boxes all at once. This is only for the honest parties. For dishonest parties, you can't guarantee what they're doing. So our security proof will be in the parallel setting. An example of a parallel setting device independent security proof is the parallel DIQPD protocol given by Jane Miller and Shi, and whose security proof was subsequently simplified by Vidic. Our ECD protocol will actually make heavy use of this parallel DIQPD protocol. So let's see how that works first. So in DIQPD, you typically have 2 honest parties, Alice and Bob, and a third party eavesdropper Eve, and Alice and Bob want to share a secret key, which is secret from the third party eavesdropper Alice, a third party eavesdropper Eve. They have access to a classical authenticated channel and private trusted randomness. So in our case, the party Bob will not be trusted, but we can still make use of the DIQPD protocol. So DIQPD protocol given by Jane Miller and Shi goes like this. So Alice and Bob here have L pairs of boxes. So Alice inputs X1 to XL into her boxes, and Bob inputs Y1 to YL, and Alice gets outputs A1 to AL, Bob gets outputs B1 to BL. Now Alice picks a random subset S of L and sends all her inputs and AS to Bob, and Bob sends all his inputs and BS back to Alice. And then they test if the magic square winning condition is satisfied on this subset S. If it is accepted, then they continue with the protocol. And if it is not accepted, then they abort. If they do not abort, then their raw secret key is said to be this AI, the shared bit for Alice and Bob for all the bits. I mean, all the indices L. I'm presenting a slightly simplified version. The actual protocol will involve some anchoring and stuff, which I'm not covering at the moment. Okay. Now the final key is going to be a privacy amplified version of the raw key K. This privacy amplification is going to be done by the leftover hashing lemma. And in order to apply the leftover hashing lemma, we need a bound on the min entropy of K, the smooth min entropy of K, given Eve's, all the stuff that Eve has. Eve can have a purification of Alice and Bob's quantum systems plus XY, which they have communicated through the public classical channel. So we need a bound on this HMIN condition on the protocol not aborting. Okay, and another thing is this HMIN can be interpreted operationally as the log of the inverse of the probability that Eve guesses the key K. Now, what do I mean by this Eve's quantum system E tilde? So Alice and Bob have these boxes, which I'm just writing as single quantum system. A tilde and B tilde now, and they think that they have a shared entangled state among just themselves. But in reality, the third party eavesdropper can share an overall quantum state with them, which is entangled amongst all three players. And Eve has, so we are going to model Eve's quantum system as also a box. And Eve has access to X and Y that Alice and Bob have communicated via the quantum channel. So we'll model this as Eve inputting X and Y into her box. Now, the security proof of this will follow the one given by Vidic. So this is done via a 3-player variant of the Magic Square game, which this kind of looks like anyway. Alice and Bob provide inputs X and Y into their boxes, and Eve provides inputs X, Y into her box. So the 3-player version of the Magic Square game looks like this. Alice and Bob receive X and Y just like in Magic Square, and Eve receives inputs X and Y. And they win the game if Alice and Bob win the Magic Square game amongst themselves. And also Alice and Bob have this common bit that they have in the normal Magic Square game, and Eve has to guess that common bit. And it can be shown that the winning probability is this 3-player Magic Square game is less than 1. So in the Magic Square QKD protocol, it can be seen with some effort that, well, not much effort, that the probability that Eve guesses K and there is no abort is the probability of winning L copies of the 3-player Magic Square game, which we call MSE. And due to a parallel repetition theorem for anchored games by Bavarian, Vidic, and UN, we can show that this probability goes down exponentially in K. By the way, the actual MSE game that we'll consider is going to involve anchoring, which is just a proof technique. But I haven't included the anchoring definition here. So the anchoring is needed in order to be able to show the parallel repetition theorem. Okay, so since we have this exponentially small winning probability, then we can put this into the H-min bound that that we need, and then get linear lower bound on the H-min and condition on no abort, and yeah, then we can do privacy amplification and get a raw key that is independent of Eve. This corresponds to a standard trace distance based security definition that you have for QKD. Okay, now how do we plan to use this DI-QKD protocol for our DI-ECD protocol? So since Bob is not a trusted party in this case, Alice will use the DI-QKD protocol partly by herself. So she's going to choose X1 to XL and Y1 to YL herself. And then Alice and Bob are going to do the DI-QKD protocol, but Bob is not going to have Y1 all to himself, only the subset that he needs to perform the test. Now, Alice's ciphertext in the ECD protocol is going to be M XORed with the final key that Alice and Bob get from the DI-QKD protocol. And the decryption key is going to be X1 to XL and Y1 to YL, because in the DI-QKD protocol, if Bob has access to X1 to XL and Y1 to YL, then he can get the raw key and also the final key. So with that, he'll be able to get the final key, and then he can XOR that with the ciphertext in order to obtain the message. So this provides security against a third party by default, even if the ciphertext is not deleted, because that's just inherited from the DI-QKD protocol. Now, what we need for security against Bob, in case he decides not to delete the ciphertext, is that we need Bob to be able to produce a correct deletion certificate somehow, and we need that this producing this correct deletion certificate erases the raw key K, and hence also the final key. So in order to do this, we'll use another variant of the Magic Square game, which is going to be a 2-player game, but instead of a 1-round game, it's going to be 2 rounds. So Alice and Bob are going to receive 2 rounds of inputs and have to provide 2 rounds of outputs. So I'm also giving a simplified version of the game definition here. The actual game is going to involve anchoring again. So in the first round, Alice and Bob of this MSB game, Alice and Bob play the normal Magic Square game as usual with inputs X and Y prime set. In the second round, then Bob is given X and some Y that is not equal to Y prime, and Alice has to guess, Bob has to guess Alice's output AY. So recall in the first round, Bob was able to guess Bob can guess Alice's input AY prime because Bob has input Y prime and he performs a measurement with Y prime. And then if Bob has access to X, then Bob should be able to guess AY prime because that should be equal to BX. So, but Bob should not be able to guess AY because in the honest case, Bob's measurement that he did in the first round, that should erase info about AY. So using this intuition, Fu and Miller prove via rigidity of the Magic Square game that suppose the winning probability in the first round is 1 minus delta, then the winning probability in the second round is at most half plus order square root delta. So this means that the quantum value of this MSB game is less than 1. Now this gives us a way of making Bob produce a deletion certificate that will erase the ciphertext for him. So suppose if Alice wants Bob to delete the ciphertext, Alice can send Y prime, Y1 prime to YL prime to Bob, where each YI prime is different from YI that she used to encrypt. And Bob asks Alice to send some B1 prime to BL prime. Ideally, Bob does this via just doing the Y prime measurement, but he could, if he's dishonest, he could do whatever. Now, Alice checks this B1 prime to BL prime that Bob has sent, and she accepts his deletion certificate if AI YI prime is equal to B prime XI. So that means that the Magic Square game is, the first round of the Magic Square game is one with XI and YI prime, and AI and BI prime. So, and it's not too difficult to see that after XI, X1 to XL and Y1 to YL is revealed to Bob, and the probability that Bob guesses the key and Alice accepts the deletion certificate is equal to the winning probability of Alice and Bob on this L copies of the MSB game. And we are going to show that this winning probability goes down exponentially in L. This is a new parallel repetition theorem that we show. The parallel repetition theorem we show is actually going to be for a more general class of two-player two-round games. So we call this class of two-player two-round games product anchored games. So in this game, in this type of game, what happens is that Alice and Bob share some entangled state as usual in in one round two-player game. And in the first round, they receive X and Y. X and Y in the first round have to be from some product distributions. And then they produce first round outputs A and B prime by doing some measurements on their halves of the shared entangled state. In the second round, Bob has two possibilities. Bob receives some input Z, which could be just nothing, an empty set with probability alpha, or it could be XY with probability 1 minus alpha. And for this anchoring property that we require, what we'll do is we'll say that the probability of XY prime given Z equal to this bottom is equal to the marginal probability distribution of X and Y prime. Okay, and then Bob produces second round output B. This is produced by a measurement that potentially depends on Bob's first round input, Bob's second round input, and Bob's first round output on his half of the entangled state. His half of the entangled state that he has after doing the measurement of the first round. And the winning condition of the game is some predicate V on the first round inputs and outputs A, B prime, x y prime is satisfied, and some predicate on the first round inputs, first round outputs, and the second round inputs and outputs is satisfied. So both the predicates have to be satisfied. So in our case, this is going to be that in the first round, the magic square game is 1, and in the second round, Bob is able to guess AY. And we show that for this class of games, a parallel repetition theorem, that is, if the winning probability of a single game is less than 1, then the winning probability of multiple copies, L copies of the game goes down exponentially in L. I have a proof sketch for the parallel repetition theorem, which I'll maybe briefly go over, but this may not be useful to people who are not familiar with parallel repetition theorems. So the general strategy in an information theoretic framework for parallel repetition that was introduced by Raz. So it goes like this. So suppose you have a strategy for L copies of G, and consider some subset C of L. Then we're going to show that one of these two conditions holds. You're going to show that either the winning probability on C is already small, or there exists some I that is not in C, such that the winning probability in I condition on winning in C is smaller than 1. Then by induction, we can find a large enough set C such that the winning probability in that set goes down exponentially in L. So, and the second condition is proved using contradiction. Yeah, so if you show that if the first condition does not hold and the second condition does not hold, then we can construct a strategy for a single copy of G whose winning probability is greater than the quantum value of a single copy of G. Okay, and how we'll do this? We'll consider a state that represents the state of the strategy of for the 2-round game after 2 rounds. So this state will consist of the input and output registers of Alice and Bob in superposition, as well as the shared entangled state. Also, since Alice and Bob's first round outputs are produced before Bob receives Z, in this state psi, the first round output registers A and B prime are going to be independent of Z given X and Y prime. And then we are going to consider another state phi, which is psi condition on the event E, which is winning on C. And so suppose we measure the X, Y prime and Xi, Y prime I and Zi registers on phi, the resulting state, and get outputs small xi, small y prime I and Zi. We'll call the resulting state phi xi, y prime I, Zi. And the state that we get by measuring the AI, the distribution that we get by measuring the AI, B prime I and Bi registers on phi xi, y prime I, Zi, that is going to be exactly the conditional distribution that is produced from the AI, B prime I, Bi in the strategy for G to the L condition on the event E. Now our strategy for a single copy of G is going to go as follows. So first we want to, in the first round, we want to produce the distribution AI, B prime I condition on the all of the inputs Xi, Y prime I, Zi, even though they haven't gotten the input Zi yet, and also condition on the event E. So the problem is that Bob has not gotten the second round input Zi yet, but we can show that Bob's the distribution AI, B prime I conditioned on Xi, Y prime I, Zi and the event E is equal to the distribution when Zi has value bottom, because these AI and B prime I were originally produced independent of Zi. So the strategy in the first round is going to be Alice and Bob share the state phi condition on Zi equal to bottom, and produce phi xi y prime I bottom by local operations. This goes exactly like the single round parallel repetition theorem for gains with product distributions. This proof was given by Jane, Pereslany, and Yao. So I'm not going to say how this works. In the second round, then given the AI and B prime they produced in the first round and the inputs xi, y prime I, zi, they want to produce the correct distribution of bi given these inputs and the event e. So Alice does not get anything in the first round, and their share state at the end of the first round is already xi, y prime I, and bottom. So Bob needs to get the state xi, y prime I, ci from xi, y prime I, bottom. So in order to do this, we'll observe that Alice's registers and the B prime register in xi, phi xi, y prime I, zi, and phi xi, y prime I, and bottom are close because they were close in the original state psi, and we've conditioned on a large probability event to get from psi to phi. So that does not change the states too much. And we can find some y for which this is true. And once we've shown that these registers are close, then we can, by Ullmann's theorem, find a unitary that acts only on the other registers and takes the state phi xi, y prime I, zi, phi xi, y prime I, bottom to xi, y prime I, zi. So this unitary is going to depend on xi, y prime I, zi. But now notice that Bob at the end of in the second round, Bob has access to y prime I and zi. Now zi is either bottom. If zi is already bottom, then Bob has nothing to do because he already has the required state that he needs. Or zi is equal to xi and then yi. So zi contains xi. So then Bob has access to all the information he needs, and then Bob can produce the state. Apply this unitary and produce the state. So the overall strategy is going to look like this. Alice and Bob shared the state phi bottom, and then in the first round they receive xi, yi as inputs. Then they apply their unitaries ui and bi, uxi and byi, say, and then they get to phi xi, yi bottom in the first round, and then they do their measurements to give their first round outputs. Then in the second round, Bob gets his input zi, and he applies this unitary, this Ullmann unitary wz yi, y prime I, sorry, that should be y prime I, y prime I, zi to get the state phi xi, y prime I, zi. Oh, all of these should be y prime I. I'm sorry. Yeah. And then he can do a measurement to give his second round outputs. Okay, that completes the parallel refutation proof. Sorry, that was possibly not comprehensible, but yeah, it maybe makes sense if you're familiar with parallel refutation theorems. Okay, another thing we do is that we show that our protocol has composable security. So composable security, this is going to be done in this abstract cryptography framework introduced by Maurer and Renner. So how this sort of security proof is done is you define some sort of ideal functionality that you want to achieve, and you have a real protocol that has some other functionalities that you use, or functionalities or resources that you use, and you need to prove that your real protocol can safely replace the ideal functionality. This security definition is operational because if you can show this, then this means that if you compose your protocol with some more protocols, you can basically replace your protocol in the overall protocol, and then that doesn't affect the security of your overall protocol. Now, how do we show that the real protocol and ideal functionality are close? I mean, we need to do this with some distinguishers and some kind of simulator thing that I'll explain later. The advantage of this framework is that it does not rely on the dishonest parties having any sort of goals or incentives, so that, you know, if you use this protocol as part of a larger protocol, the goals that you assume your dishonest parties have in your smaller protocol may not be the same goals that that your dishonest party in the larger protocol has. So if you have a security definition in the smaller protocol where you assume that your dishonest party has a particular goal, that security definition might not be useful in the larger protocol. So yeah, this framework does not rely on that. And this framework also requires that we describe our functionalities and protocols in terms of certain resources. So our DI ECD protocol will use some resources that QKD protocol also uses. For example, an authenticated classical channel. So in DI QKD, Alice and Bob use private trusted randomness as a resource. So in DI ECD instead, recall that we want security to be there even when the secret key is eventually revealed to Bob. So the resource we'll use instead for the DI ECD protocol will be some kind of temporarily secure private randomness for Alice. So this provides some randomness to Alice that is private to her for some time, and eventually this is revealed to Bob and potentially also third parties. Okay, and this is going to be the source from which Alice gets the X1 to XL, Y1 to YL decryption keys. And how do we show that our protocol has composable security? So I'll give a simplified outline in the case where we have honest Alice and dishonest Bob only. We don't consider the third party eavesdrop for it, but it can be done with some small modifications. So our ideal functionality is going to be like this. It's going to be some kind of box which has interfaces for Alice and Bob. So in the interface, in the input interface for Alice inputs the message M. In the interface for Bob, he inputs whether or not he wants to delete the ciphertext or does not want to delete the ciphertext, which is some F, and this F gets directly broadcast to Alice. And if Bob decides to delete the ciphertext when F is equal to this tick mark, then Bob does not get to learn the ciphertext, so he just gets some dummy ciphertext, which is all zeros later. He just gets some dummy message 0 to the n later. And if Bob decides to delete the does not decide to delete the ciphertext, then Bob can learn the message if he wants. So in the output interface of Bob, either M is produced if Bob does not delete the ciphertext, or 0 to the n is produced if Bob deletes the ciphertext. Okay. Oh, sorry. Our real protocol is going to be something messy. So we have some real real resources that we use, which is authenticated classical channel and the temporarily private resources. We do lots of stuff with it in the real protocol. And in order to show composable security, we need to show that the protocol acting on the real resources that we use is indistinguishable from the ideal functionality when a simulator acts on the interface of the dishonest party in the ideal functionality. What the simulator will do, this is inspired by the composable security proof of QKD itself. So in the simulator itself will run like a dummy version of the protocol within itself. So it will encrypt some dummy message, and basically it runs the protocol with this dummy message. And at the end, it uses the message that it gets from the ideal functionality to fool the distinguisher by saying it has got one second. So in the real functionality, right, this resource R, that is the temporarily private randomness that is used in the protocol, that is revealed in the end. And in the simulator will basically use this R to convince the distinguisher that the real message was encrypted instead of the dummy message in this version on the right hand side. Okay. Yeah, so this is the version for honest Alice and dishonest Bob, but minor variants with the eavesdropper basically follow from the same proof. So from doing the composable security definition, we got some insights. For example, the temporarily private random source R, it needs to be at least as big as the size of the message in order for this simulator fooling the distinguisher to work. And indeed, this is true for our protocol, and as well for the protocol, the device dependent protocol given by Broadbent and Islam. And this is this randomness source being, I mean, this extra randomness use being at least as big as the message. This was proven necessary for a task called tamper evidence storage, which is sort of related to encryption with certified deletion. This was shown by, yeah, some authors whose names are unfortunately forgotten last year. And another thing we got from doing a composable security proof is that no sort of commitment property is possible in this protocol. As in, Alice is supposed to reveal a message to Bob, but our protocol is such that, if Bob is honest, Alice can change the message that she is supposed to reveal at any point because of the temporarily private randomness source. She can convince Bob that the temporarily private randomness source reveals some other source of randomness, and hence the message was different. So yeah, we can't use this sort of protocol to also achieve commitment in terms of the message from Alice if Alice is dishonest. Though in our task, Alice is always considered honest, so that's fine. Okay, so in summary, we proved a new parallel repetition theorem in order to give this DI-ECD protocol. And parallel security seems important here instead of the sequential setting, because in cases like DI-QKD, you have two honest parties, Alice and Bob. So you can ensure that both of them provide their inputs sequentially. But here, since we have a dishonest Bob, we cannot make a dishonest Bob provide inputs sequentially to his boxes. So, I mean, a sequential security proof that way does not seem possible. And we modified the security arguments. We provided security against an eavesdropper, unlike the Broadbent and Islam, and we also give composable security. Some future prospects would be to find other applications of the two-round parallel repetition theorem that we proved, or similar two-round parallel repetition theorems. We could consider combining this protocol with other protocols to achieve other cryptographic tasks, because as we already saw, this protocol has composable security. And another prospect would be to try and do other DI tasks based on this unclonability sort of property. The unclonability means that, because quantum states satisfy the no cloning theorem. And we made use of that because if Bob had a classical ciphertext, then Bob could have just copied the ciphertext and be done with it. Since Bob had a quantum ciphertext, Bob obviously cannot do that. So yeah, this protocol makes use of this unclonability property, and it would be nice to see if there are other DI tasks which rely on this sort of property. Okay, so that's